Hi everyone, welcome back. Today's going to be part 3 of our video series on creating our ChatGPT desktop app. So if you haven't seen the previous two, I'll link the description down below if you want to have a look so you can follow along. In today's video, what we're going to do is add a bit of extra functionality. So in the last video, we ensured that the application was a single instance by using the mutexes, and we explored how we can do inter-process communication using the named pipes. So what we're going to do today is just extend the functionality slightly further. What I wanted to do was to add a list of prompts that we can make our own custom prompts, and we can also list all the awesome ChatGPT prompts, which I'm not sure if you've seen, but I'll show you those in a minute. So let's jump straight in. What I have done though is I did record the video previously and I forgot to press record, so I've done a lot of the code. So what I thought I would do today is I will just walk you through what I have done, highlight why I've done certain things, and maybe a few caveats to look out for. Yeah, so I'll start by showing you just what I have added to the app, and then I'll kind of walk you through the code and show you how we've implemented all of that. So one of the new things you'll see is that I've got two tabs in here. So I've just added an extra tab for the playground because ChatGPT at the moment is down quite a lot. So it's quite nice just to be able to have access to the playground as well. Then the other feature I've added is you can click this button over here and it will show you a list of prompts that you can save. So these are my own custom prompts. So you can add your own ones. You can call, say, like, write a poem, for instance, and you could write your text there. And then what it does is when you actually double click on that, it will pre-populate the text box for you. So if you've got things you use all the time, it's nice and easy. You can just double click on one of these things and it will load it up for you. And then, so that's my prompts. And then we've got the awesome prompts, which is a curated list of ChatGPT prompts on GitHub. I'll put the link down in the description as well for you. They've got a CSV file there with all the prompting, so I thought I might as well just download that and then you have access to those in here. So they've got some very cool things. I mean, acting as a Linux terminal, things for like advertising, legal. I'll let you guys obviously have a look through this list, but they also all here. And again, it works in the same manner. And you can also edit and delete these if you need to. So if we jump into the code, I'll show you, give you a walk through pretty much how we've implemented all of that stuff. So the first thing that I added onto here was the side panel. So in WinForms, well, there's many ways of doing this. I mean, the way I decided to implement it was just to use a split panel. If this decides to load, oh, there we go. Yeah, what I might do actually just add a new form, then we can maybe just show you kind of the approach you would have taken to add this. Yeah, let's just add a random form and I'll show you quickly. Cool. Yeah, so in WinForms, you have a split box. I mean, these are used quite a lot, a split container. So what you can do with a split container is you put in and basically divide your form into two sections. You can also set a particular section to be fixed, and you can also change the size. So if I show you in here, if you bring this up, you can, it's got like a little anchor here, so you can change the size of that particular area and you can set it to be fixed. So that's pretty much what we've done, is we've done that, and then we've used a data grid. So you can find a data grid in here, you can put the data grid on, you can dock that, and then we've bound some data to the data grid. And then the only other things we've done on here is just to add a text box above and a button, and then some radio buttons. And then in order to, what I'll jump into quickly now is just show you how we've done all the saving of the all the prompts over here. So I went for a very simple approach. Many ways of doing this again, but I just decided to make a simple JSON repository, so it saves all of these just as a JSON file. And if you want to have a look at all the data that it's actually saving, you can have a look in your app data folder. If you bring that up, you should see there's a folder called ChatGPT Desktop, and within there it creates all the repositories, and it also saves all the WebView data. So this is where it saves all your cookies and your session state for the ChatGPT app, which is another thing I fixed in here, and I'll show you in a second. And then, yeah, in terms of the repositories, so it's just a very simple JSON file that it saves for both of them. I'll just open up one so you can have a look quickly. But it's essentially just an object with an act and a prompt, and then there's one for the awesome prompts and there's one for the my prompts, and they both work in exactly the same way. So the way that that was implemented is I just chose to use a simple repository pattern. So I made this base repository, which is a generic repository. So you pass in the name of the repository type and the entity type that it will be saving. And then all we do over here is we grab the app data folder, the ChatGPT folder, which I've just shown you. And then the file name will be the folder name plus whatever the name of the repository is that you're using. So for instance, if we have a look, I've got the myprompts repository and I've got the awesome prompts repository, which both inherit from here. So the myprompts repository inherits from base repository. It passes itself in as the repository. And then this is the entity type that you're going to be using. So they both the same at the moment. They're using act prompt, but you could pass any other object in here and then it will save that JSON for you. So it's quite easy to add additional repositories if you need. So it does that. Comes in, it initializes, so this basically just goes through, checks if the folder exists. If it doesn't exist, it will create it, and it will also create the file for each repository type. And then there's just some very simple methods. So we've got a getAll, which will load that JSON file, deserialize it, and return you the list of objects. We've got a getById, which again will just load them all, and it will use as queryable to find the field. In order to do the string expressions in here, because with this we don't know what the ID field actually is, because that is passed in when you create the repository. So you'll see over here, for these particular ones I've just used act, but that could be any other property within your object. So in order to be able to do the dynamic link statements, what we've used is a library. I can show you if we look into here. Yeah, it's system.link.dynamic core. So that allows you to be able to write these dynamic link statements. Because usually when you're writing link, it has to be a strongly typed object. So if you ever need to do something like that, yeah, have a look at this library, system.link.dynamic core. Very useful for doing dynamic things like this. So we've got the get, and then we've got the save all, so that you basically just takes a list and it will save that entire JSON file. And then we've got the save a particular entity, which will try and find that entity. If it exists, it will update that entity. If it doesn't exist, it will add the entity and then call save all. And then just a method for delete, which again will load them all, find the one that you want, and then remove it. So for the purpose of this desktop app, this is more than sufficient. In a production kind of enterprise application, this is probably not how you would go about implementing it, but it does the trick for what we need to do. And I'll probably add some more repositories in future as well, actually, just for like configuration and stuff, which will be really easy because all I'll need to do is make another class like this and just have a configuration class that we create. So it'll be very simple to then consume. And then if we jump onto the form, I'll show you a few things we've done on there. So we've obviously been through this. We've added the tabs over here as well. So that's very much how we added the first one. It's just another tab with a web view. And then when you click the refresh button or any of these buttons here, it just checks which radio button is selected. And then it will load the appropriate data. So I can show you that quickly. Yes, we've got the load page, which was our original one, and then we've got the load playground page over here. And then for the loading of the actual prompts that you see, it just checks which radio button's checked, and then it sets the data source either to the my prompts or to the awesome prompts, and then it binds the data to the data grid. So the data grid, yeah, this null over here is just because when you refresh the data grid, you have to set it to null first before you set the prompts. It's a bit of an oddity with this particular data grid, but that's what it does. And then we're just hiding the prompt column and just showing the act column. And then one or two other little things I changed was, originally there was a bit of a bug on this. I don't know if you noticed it, but every time you would update the app, you would have to log in again because it would have lost your session. So in order to fix that, what you can do with the web view is you can set this environment variable, which tells the web view where to store the user data. So that's what we saw here in the app data, which is this EB web view. And you can go into there and have a look, but it's basically just all the state and configuration for the web view. So that between updates, it doesn't lose that, because by default, it saves it in the directory of the executing assembly, which would change as the versions change with the Click Once app. But now it's in your app data, it will persist across such updates. That was another little fix that we've done. I was just trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, so we obviously made the prompt editor, so there's a separate form for when you add the prompts. Very simple form. It's just got a text box, two text boxes on it, and a save button. One of the, I suppose, more interesting things is the validation. So I can show you one here actually. So if you add something and you don't, it won't let you click out the text box. You'll see this little error over here. So if you do that, and even if you click save, you'll see it will pop up and it'll say the prompt is required. So in order to achieve that in WinForms, there's also, again, many ways of doing it, but the way I chose to do it was with the error provider. So the error provider is just a standard component in the WinForms library. You can add it onto your form, and then what you can do is essentially just say error provider.set error. You give it the control, and then you give it a message to display. And you can obviously do that in different places. I've done it on the text box validating. So this is an event on the text box. Essentially, as you try and click out of the text box, it will call this validating event. If the text is empty, it will set the error and it will call cancel on this validating, so it won't validate. So I've just done that for both of those text boxes. And then when we click the save button, there's a method on the WinForms called validate children. So you'll call that. That will just ensure that everything is validated. And if it is validated, then it will call dialog result that OK. And then the way that we consume this form from the front end is we'll say, create a new instance of the form, and then you'll say show dialog, and then you say if the dialog result equals OK, then we go through and we save our prompt. And then this is just a bit of code over here to refresh the current item on the data grid and refresh it for us. And then the save prompt is obviously just using the repository. It just takes the prompt and calls save on whichever repository we currently have selected. So that's pretty much how that works. Obviously, all this code will be on GitHub and stuff as well, so you can go and kind of have a look at it. And then there's various events that I've done for the data grid. So essentially how the data grid works, when you right click on it, it will set the selected item. And then when you click any of the other options, it will use that selected item to show the prompt. So you can see over here, we say show prompt for the selected item. And then one of the other things we added in order to get the list of awesome ChatGPT prompts, we've made an HTTP client to do that. So again, quite a simple thing. So we pass the HTTP client in, and then we just call this URL over here, which is on the GitHub, so we can grab that CSV file, and then we just parse the CSV file. I was going to recommend to you to use a CSV parser. There's many libraries that do this. It's been done to death. But unfortunately, this CSV file is a bit corrupted and invalid. It's not a valid CSV, so to speak. So I had to kind of write a bit of code myself just to work around some of the issues in it. Yeah, something I was trying to avoid because I've written that a million times myself in different ways, but that works. So yeah, basically that just gets the prompts, parses the CSV, and it returns a list of the prompts here, which we then save in the repository, and then we're able to load them up again. Yeah, so one of the points to note in here is, I suppose, the HTTP client. If you experience with .NET, you probably know this already, but a lot of new people, when they come to using the HTTP client, tend to wrap it in a using statement. Now this has a few problems which aren't immediately obvious to yourself. So what happens is when you keep creating new instances of this and disposing them, it eventually keeps sockets open on the server that you're connecting to. So it's probably not so bad if you're connecting to like GitHub or some third party, but if you're using it as like a client to connect to your own servers, you can soon run into socket exhaustion. This is something I've dealt with quite a lot in our enterprise applications. It's surprising how often this comes up. And sometimes you won't notice it because the sockets do expire after a certain period, but where you've got very high volume APIs, like we have like an SMS API that gets thousands, hundreds of thousands of messages per second, that when we first released it, we had really crazy problems, and it took us a long time to try and figure out actually what the issue was. And it turned out that it was actually the HTTP client, because we were disposing it on every use, that it was suffering from socket exhaustion. So one thing to always note when you're using HTTP client is to try and, if you can, use the HTTP client factory from Microsoft. It's a new class that they've, or factory that they've implemented in .NET Core. So if you're using .NET Core and stuff, it kind of guides you down the right road, to be honest. The way it's implemented in this WinForms app at the moment is something I want to change, but what it is, just a single instance at the moment. So it's basically started up from here. So this prompt HTTP client, I'll start it up here. So this will only have one instance of it for this prompt HTTP client. This is something I'm going to change. I'm probably going to do another video just on how to do dependency injection, at which point I'll switch it over to use the HTTP client factory. And you can try and implement this yourself by passing in a WebSocket handler. There's quite a lot to it though if you go and look at the source code for the actual HTTP client factory, how it's implemented. So for the purpose of this, I'm going to leave it. It's not too bad in the desktop app because you can always close the desktop app and start it up again. When you're running in something like a website or an API that's running for months or years on end without being restarted, that's primarily when you start running into problems. So what I'll do is I'll put some links in the description below. I'll give you a quick brief on them over here though. So I think this is probably one of the most famous articles when it comes to HTTP clients. I think it's saved a lot of people's lives, but this basically shows you what happens when you do dispose the HTTP client and you don't manage it correctly. So I'll let you read it, but essentially you suffer from socket exhaustion. So if you're doing this, you can see he's done a bit of a test. It started up all these connections. It's finished, that program's completely finished and closed, and yet it still has all these open connections on his server. And then this just kind of goes through obviously all the way TCP works. And then the fix back in the day was to obviously just create one instance of the HTTP client, make it static, and then just reuse that same instance for everything. Now that solves the socket exhaustion problem. The one issue that this approach does suffer from is DNS updates. So when you create the instance, it kind of when you first resolve this, it will cache all the DNS records. So if you've got like failover DNSs, if it does happen to fail over and the DNS switches, this thing will still have the old DNS records, at which point this will stop working. And that's another issue I've run into with production code. But thankfully, Microsoft has recognized this, and they have now got the HTTP client factory, which you can use. They do go through over here the issues pretty much I've just described. But yeah, I would recommend reading through this if you're not familiar with it. But the new HTTP factory is really good. So if you're using the dependency injection, you can just add the HTTP client over here. It will inject that HTTP client for you, and then it will manage all the web handlers and stuff for you in the background. And it's also nice because you can add all the poly stuff, and I'll let you guys have a read through this, all the lifetimes. But that was just something I thought I would point out because it's not particularly obvious for new people coming to .NET, and it's something, like I say, I've run into many times in our production environments, and it's quite difficult to track down actually when it happens. So just bear that in mind if you're ever using HTTP clients. So that's pretty much that. I was just wondering if there's anything else I could show you quickly. I think I've pretty much run through everything. So I apologize for not going through and coding it with you. Actually, I did record it, but it's I thought I was recording. It didn't actually record in the end. But what I was hoping is next time, I think what I'll do is I'll maybe show you how we can implement the dependency injection in here, and then we can change this over here to actually use the HTTP client factory, and we'll change all of this stuff so that it resolves a bit nicer. If you guys have got anything else you would like to cover, I know some of the guys in the comments have put some ideas about trying to use the AI to query SQL and to make like Q&A bots. It's also something I want to look at. So I think maybe I'll do the next video just on the dependency injection in here, and then we can start doing something new. Start having a look at trying to do some Q&A chatbots and how to maybe dynamically query SQL, because I think those are two interesting aspects and things that will be quite useful both for my personal and for my professional endeavors. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, guys.